Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this sunny Tuesday morning. I'm Roudie Shafie. I'm a partner here at OVID Health. OVID Health, we're an independent health specialist communication agency. And being independent means we can follow our passion. We set out from the beginning to be a leading agency in patient advocacy and partnerships between patient groups and pharmaceutical companies. And out of this passion and desire was born the Patient Partnership Index. It is an initiative that we run entirely pro bono in a spirit of walking it like we talk it. It's really to celebrate best practice in partnerships between pharmaceutical companies and patient groups. And I'm delighted to welcome you for our third annual event after the partnership entries that we received this year. I'm delighted that we'll hear from a panel of judges first, and then we'll get a chance in the second half of this webinar to celebrate the fantastic gold entries we received. We will hear from companies and their patient partners as a whirlwind top line celebration of some of the best practice we've seen. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing this passion of ours, and we hope you enjoy the discussion. So I will now invite the judges to join the panel. So if you just give us a second while we assemble everyone.
Oh no, hang on. Maybe this has worked.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Fantastic. I am delighted to be joined this morning by a panel of judges, starting with Jenny Ousby, CEO and founder of OVID Health and lead judge. Good morning, Jenny.
Morning.
Sarah Woolnough, CEO of Asthma and Lung UK. Thank you, Sarah, for coming back as a judge again this year. Good morning.
Good morning.
Colette Goldrick, Executive Director of Strategy and Partnerships at the ABPI. Good morning, Colette.
Good morning, everyone.
And of course, John James, CEO of the Sickle Cell Society. Good morning, John.
Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Great. So I'm going to kick off with a nice, easy question to each of you, which is pick one thing, just one thing that really struck you and stood out for you from the entries this year. Jenny, I'm going to start with you.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks, Rudy. Well, I think actually the one thing that really struck me is that we're in year 3 of the PPI, and I think what was wonderful is the number of entries, but also the quality of entries. And I think that one of the things that stood out for me, and hopefully partly as a result of having the index in the first place, is that probably unsurprisingly, the longer a relationship with a patient organisation, I think the better the partnership was and the greater the impact. And I think one of the things that the judges really liked to see was that partnerships that had developed over time had developed that trust and that honesty, but also that learning from mistakes and actually learning what worked and what didn't. And I think that the partnerships that demonstrated that trust and demonstrated that continuous learning actually produced the better results for patients. And that was kind of really lovely to see, actually.
Thank you, Jenny. Sarah, what stood out for you?
Thank you, Rudy. Well, I mean, I'm lucky enough to be a second-time judge. So I judged last year as well. And so, I mean, a few things stood out for me, but if I pick one, even in a year, I think the development in genuine co-creation stood out. I think there was barely an entry that we looked at that you didn't feel this has genuinely come about because of a good process of co-creation. So the company and the patient organisation really sitting down together, trying to understand often insight from beneficiaries, from patient communities in order to develop the initiative, the campaign, whatever it is. And that's so pleasing to see, because I know in my day job, we have such a wealth of insight from beneficiaries, from patients, and to see that really utilised, really well understood was fantastic.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Colette?
So obviously completely agree with everything that Jenny and Sarah have said. The longevity of the relationships, the genuine sense of co-creation really stood out for me as a first-time judge. I was also really delighted to see, and my fellow judges will have heard me sort of exult about this. I was really delighted to see some of the focus on research, on partnerships involving patients in research, which is desperately needed to improve both genuine patient involvement in designing studies, and also to improve the diversity of those patients. And to see focus on that in these relationships and partnerships was absolutely fantastic. And it was a great privilege to be part of the process and see both the volume and the quality of what had come through.
Thank you very much. John, what stood out for you?
Well, I agree with my colleagues, and for me, as a first-time judge, it was really the quality and breadth of all of the applications. I mean, if I could give each one a medal, I would, but there has to be a winner. That's what came through to me: real quality, real breadth. And the key point about that, as a charity leader myself, is the diversity of the partnerships, let's put it that way, between industry and the charity sector. So I was very impressed, very privileged to be part of it. And congratulate everyone for real insight into the collaboration between industry and the charity sector.
Thank you so much, John. So I'm going to stay with you and work my way back in reverse order then. What do you think were the real kind of best practice takeaways from some of those entries that you are referring to in terms of being really, really kind of the highest standard, what we call the gold kind of entries?
I think there were three things that struck out to me in terms of best practice, not in any particular order. But we shouldn't underplay the long-term enduring relationship and partnership. That's really important. So this wasn't a dip in and dip out and we'll see you in a few years. Long-term enduring partnerships, working, learning from past experiences, really, really important. And you would expect me to say this coming from the charity sector, but the other point was about impact. I mean, these are partnerships that make an impact, a real impact in the rare disease space. And that's really important for patients, beneficiaries and families. And that's really key. So when you can look at the impact and see that it's making a difference, hey, that's good for people who live with rare diseases. And I think the third point is one around collecting, in terms of best practice, evidence to support that impact, real evidence to support that impact. So those are three best practice takeaways that I think the top entries were able to evidence very clearly.
Thank you very much, John. I know you and I had a really good discussion after the judging day, and you said that you felt like there was really a genuine shift towards looking more broadly at health inequalities. Were there any examples of best practice you thought stood out in terms of really bringing into the mainstream of projects health inequalities?
Was that to me?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And sorry, I thought I didn't hear you clearly, Roudie, so my apologies.
Sorry.
Indeed, and that is really important. So when I talked earlier about real diversity, that diversity related to the health inequalities in the rare disease space. And you're right to draw my attention to that, because as a charity that deals with a lot of health inequalities in the sickle cell space, it was good to see that being addressed across the best of the applicants that we received.
Thank you so much, John. Colette, I'm going to come to you now with the same question, really, is what really stood out for you in terms of a best practice, sort of tick list that came through as a theme across all of the entries?
Well, I again, to agree violently with John, I guess, I think the way in which impact used to be defined tends to be campaign impact and what was our reach and what the equivalent and all the rest of it, and very much measures of output rather than measures of impact, and to read the genuine impact that many of these long-running relationships have had on patients' lives and on addressing health inequalities, either in disease areas that are underserved or have been somewhat overshadowed by recent events. That to me was incredibly powerful. And I think it just shows that the level of, which other judges have said already, I think the level of maturity of these relationships, they are seeking to make a difference. They are seeking to make a difference over time. They are tackling very difficult subjects. They are not going for easy wins in every instance or in most instances, and in some cases tackling very difficult subjects indeed, and evaluating what they're doing and learning from it and continuing to improve. So all of those I felt were just very, very impressive.
Yes, that's right. That point particularly about kind of continuous learning and evaluation was really a theme that came through. Sarah, were there, particularly as a CEO of a sort of patient group yourself, did you feel like something particularly stood out as best practice that really reflected your own experiences as well?
Yes, well, I mean, I do agree with what John and Colette have said, and there was quite a lot of agreement as a judging panel that entries that had really tried to drive a change and measure that change in outcome were really impressive. But I'll say something different, and partly this year is quite a special year in that some of the entries had really focused on what they could do in the wake of COVID to make a difference. And so this context specific sense of the world has been severely disrupted for many patients. That's a massive shift or change. And, could we campaign or could we develop an intervention that speaks to the particular context that the patient population might find itself in? I found that really impressive. And I say that as someone who, has been running an organization through just the most tumultuous time where the demand on our services has manifestly increased. At the same time, the resources have been severely constrained. So to work in partnership to really grapple with that, I particularly liked those entries where the company and the patient organisation had got together and thought, in the wake of COVID, where do we need to go? Where do we need to focus time and attention? That felt quite extraordinary in a couple of instances to me.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And Jenny, as the sort of chair of the judges, if you had to kind of put it in a nice short email, bullet points, what were the real kind of best practice blueprint that you pulled from it?
I felt like, and I think we had some really great discussions as judges and very in depth, and I've been reflecting on this, and I think that possibly slightly controversially, that I think sometimes best practice is when you have an unequal partnership, and I'll go on to what I mean by that, because for me, actually having that discussion up front about what, say, the charity partner can and can't do in terms of resource, and or what the pharmaceutical company is best placed to do in the course of that project, in the course of that partnership, actually having that agreement and transparency about who is going to do what and who is going to co-create what, I think it's absolutely fine. But I think that it's really clear that sometimes actually either side doesn't want an equal partnership, and I think an acceptance of that and a discussion around that I think that's, you know, to be applauded, frankly. And I think particularly in the pandemic year, as Sarah said, when charities were going through such a you know, a tough time, I think that unequal partnerships, while it doesn't sound great, actually I think is, you know, potentially the way to go if we want to ensure kind of impact and protect people's resources on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Great, yes. And I think kind of the blueprint would be something like one size doesn't fit all anyway. So that
exactly, yeah.
Great. So that's I guess the entries we saw and our reflections on them. I'd like to, now that we have you as a captive audience, and I think the participants would like to hear, is really, what do you see as the future? So imagine, you know, we're sitting here in 2-3 years time, we're reviewing the entries. What do you see within your own organizations and within your own sectors, the trends in terms of patient partnerships between patient advocacy groups and pharmaceutical company? Are there any changes that are coming? And really, how will we be empowering patients in the future is really the kind of deep topic of discussion I'd like to dive into right now. Why don't we start with Sarah?
Well, a couple of things I would say. I mean, I think there is a lot to be said for this enduring partnership approach. And, you know, we saw some fantastic entries where company and patient organisation have clearly built trust over a number of years. And then you really see the maturity, and you see risk taking, and you see deep understanding leading to innovation, I think, in some of the partnerships. So I hope that continues as a trend. I think in the wake of COVID, we're all grappling with some of the same challenges, but also opportunities. So if we think about the opportunity for you know, patient empowerment and self-management, that is a very rich vein of partnership for organisations to be thinking, how do we upskill patients to manage their condition better in the community, perhaps, to be taking on perhaps more of the learning about the condition, obviously being very careful to think about health inequalities through that. If I pull out one other theme, you know, we know our health service is under strain at the moment. And one of the things that many patient organisations find perhaps quite frustrating at times is that we know what good practice often is. It doesn't mean it gets mainstreamed in the health service. And so there were one or two entries that I particularly liked, where efforts had been made to upskill health professionals or to help roll out that best practice, gold standard best practice, great for the company, great for patient organisation, most importantly, great for patients. So this kind of working in partnership to spread best practice within the health system, I think, again, there's huge opportunity for that in the future.
Thank you, Sarah. And I remember, again, after the judging day, you and I had a great discussion in terms of some of the challenges around, you know, the partnerships that are in an effort to spread best practice, almost correctly signposting patients back into the health service, where actually the health service is trying to almost push them out slightly for various reasons, partly for capacity, sometimes for a change towards community care. How do you see the kind of the resolution of this dynamic, and you know, what do you think that will mean in terms of what projects look like in the future?
Yeah, it's a very real challenge, isn't it? And you know, something we are spending an awful lot of time talking about in respiratory health, but I know it's the same in lots of other clinical areas, is patient flow. And you know, how do we help patients manage their conditions, or get a diagnosis, or get access to the right treatment? I think the future will be a plurality of providers, and really trying to think innovatively about how people can manage their conditions. And so partnerships that help signpost, that help really show a community where they can go for different elements of support, but also how to navigate the health system, and how to have the confidence sometimes to find the help that you need. I mean, that really plays to an inequality as well, that some people are better able to navigate the system than others. I think there's huge opportunity in there, because, you know, companies have a fantastic handle on best practice, as do patient organisations. There's often an information gap between that and then a patient group and or sometimes health professionals. So finding innovative ways to fill that gap, to give people confidence to seek help and manage their condition in different ways. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I also believe, you know, with my CEO hat on, that patient groups can be providing more support often. Sometimes they need a bit of help to do so. So it'd be interesting to see if companies and patients can team up to that end as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, for that contribution. Colette, what do you see kind of as coming forward in terms of innovation in the future, in terms of partnerships, and particularly, you know, being from the ABPI, what do you see as the drivers from the company side?
Yeah, so I'd like to begin, Roudie, actually by sort of circling back to Jenny's comment about unequal partnerships, which is I just thought a really interesting concept. And I guess whilst I agree with where you're coming from, Jenny, I see it more in Marxist terms. We're going to quote Karl Marx, which I bet you weren't expecting this morning. I think it's
go for it.
I think it is more a question of from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And that's the way partnerships need to work, with a reflection and an understanding of the resource capabilities of various different organizations and how they need to be flexed. And so I guess what I'd like to see in future is more of that, more of those partnerships which are not placing unreasonable burdens over long periods of time on organizations that will struggle to kind of manage that. That's one piece. The second piece, we've talked already about impact and reach. And I think seeing that ambition continue and seeing the work that's done in the UK, which in many cases is genuinely globally leading, seeing that work being shared not just across the UK, but actually internationally, and more international links being forged so that wheels aren't being reinvented from country to country, because some of the needs that have been addressed in this year's entries are very certainly global. But even in conditions which we maybe less associate as being global issues, I think there is very definitely room to spread international best practice and to create relationships which do span that international dimension. So I'd love to see more of that. And then, as you say, Roudie, coming from the ABPI, we're working really hard at the ABPI to enable patient engagement and to evolve our thinking to make that easier for both companies and patient organizations to undertake. So I would really like, I'd like everybody to be seeing the ABPI as an enabling force for those incredibly powerful and valuable relationships, and not as, you know, some rules that we need to be sure we don't break. That's not the dynamic that we want to create, and we're very passionate about moving forward and supporting companies and patient organizations in kind of overcoming obstacles so that they can create these amazing initiatives. And to give our own organization a little plug, we are running regular, what we're calling collaboration surgeries to that end, where an organization, a patient organization and a company who've had some problems or issues that they've overcome actually share those with the rest of industry and our patient organization forum. And those are proving incredibly popular because, surprise, surprise, the same issues and obstacles crop up again and again, and there's a lot we can learn from each other. So I guess I would, to sum up, that's a bit of a long answer, but to sum up, I think I'd like to see a real recognition of the different levels of resource and a flexing of partnerships to accommodate those moving forward. I'd like to see the ambition and the reach increase even further and beyond the shores of the UK, to make sure that the great work that's being done here is being reflected internationally. And I really would like everyone to see the ABPI as a force to support all of that good work.
Thank you, Colette. I was not expecting Karl Marx, but I was expecting ABPI code to crop up at some point. So I'm glad you brought that up proactively. Fantastic. Jenny, let me circle back to you. You know, the point Colette makes about international best practices. I know something we've worked on together before at OVID Health. Are there other types of kind of innovations you see? You know, we've been doing this for 3 years now. In 3 years' time, what type of projects do you think you'll be seeing, or what changes will you be seeing?
Yeah. Well, I think this is probably what projects do I hope we'll be seeing, as well as what projects do I think we will be doing. And I think actually probably building on Sarah and John's point. So we were talking about health inequalities, and I think there's no surprise that I think that as a theme is going to continue for the next couple of years. But I think Sarah's right about this missed opportunity or increasing opportunities for plugging the information gap. And I think that the way that we can and should be doing that in the future is about hyper-local partnerships, actually, because I think that that's where you can target specific communities with highly tailored information. And going back to Colette's point about reach and impact, I think that's, if we go hyper local, I think that's one way in which pharma and patient organisations, or indeed patients, can kind of make a greater impact. We've seen lots of in the first year of the PPI, we saw lots of kind of national level projects, and they're brilliant and fantastic, and sometimes can lead to a lot of creativity. But I think that in 3 years' time, I would like to see hyper local projects. For example, we did some work at OVID with the South East London Cancer Alliance on lung cancer. I know that other companies such as Gilead have done hyper local projects in HIV with particular communities, and I think that those are the ones that are exciting. I think they are ones in which the life sciences industry can demonstrate how innovative and how kind of grassroots it can be. So I think that's what we'll see more in 3 years' time.
Thank you. That's really, really exciting. And John, to circle back to you, what do you, again, as the CEO of a patient group, where do you see the future in terms of the partnerships you'll be delivering with companies?
Thanks, Roudie. And I agree with my colleagues in many ways, but as a first-time judge, I feel very encouraged about the next 3 years. And why I feel encouraged about the next 3 years is that doing the judgings for this year's award shows what can be done in really challenging circumstances that as judges that we discussed. So I put a little strap line that says better and stronger over the next 3 years is where I think industry and patient organisations can go. And what do I mean by better and stronger? What will be the things under that banner? All my colleagues, judging colleagues, mentioned the health inequalities element. I think a focus on addressing health inequalities, and as part of that, I think more inclusivity of patient organisations working with industry. So I want to see a focus over the next 3 years, and I believe that is really possible, of addressing health inequalities. And I'll give you an example. For sickle cell, we've worked with industry, and the issues that affect people who live in terms of quality of life in the UK are the same as the United States, are the same as Brazil, are the same as Europe. Hey, there's work to do there. So that's an example of why health inequalities and inclusivity of patient organisations, particularly those with diverse groups like the Sickle Cell Society, I see growing over the next 3 years. And another thing that I think is important will be the use of technology, how technology can support change, can support upskilling healthcare professionals, can support families in the rare disease space. So I think there'll be more of that over the next 3 to 5 years. And the final point under that strap line of better and stronger, or stronger and better, however we want to put it, is wider impact. Because I was so impressed with the impact that some of the applicants were making. If we can have more impact, actually, at the end of the day, that's great for individuals who live with rare disease, and that's what we want to see.
Great, thank you, John. And it's so interesting that you mentioned technology, because in the next session, in about 15 minutes, we're going to hear from gold companies and their patient partners. And I know one of them felt very strongly that the use of multiple platforms actually enabled much more diverse input. Do you see digitization of some of these campaigns and communication as an enabler to address health inequalities and diversity? The challenges with that?
I absolutely agree, Roudie, and that's why in terms of the future prospects of working together in a collaborative way, I think technology, whether that's through social media or devices that help health, whether that's in the health space or the home space, I think we'll be seeing more of that collaboration in the future, and it does make a difference. I mean, in the sickle cell space, we have a very active social media, and that reaches parts of the system, if I can term the NHS and NHSBT as part of the system, reaches those parts in different ways. So I think we'll definitely be seeing more of that over the next 3 to 5 years.
Great. Thank you, John. Jenny, this is something we talked about at the last PPI seminar as well. This idea about new platforms of communication, some of them even being through organic patient groupings rather than the formal patient groups as well. Talk us through the process. When we as an agency are supporting, say, pharma companies and their patient groups to decide in terms of what platforms to use, how is the conversation evolving?
I think that there's from a technology perspective, I think, and from a practical perspective, of course, in 2022, 2023, we have more platforms available. So, and I think even in the entries that we saw this year, we had, people reaching out via TikTok and LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, all that kind of stuff, as well as your traditional media. But I think for me, the question that I always start with a client is obviously, which patients do you want to reach? And really the question is, you need to go to them. Okay, so if it's the case that, for example, you want to raise awareness of a particular type of cancer in a particular community, actually having some materials that work in hairdressers and nail salons might be more appropriate than using a patient influencer on TikTok. And I think that as long as you can demonstrate that you've had that quality of conversation and questions and really dug into, where are they going to receive the information, then that's a conversation that we'd have with clients. And I would always draw parallels with them. I've been thinking about it because we're supporting a company at the moment to forge a quite hopefully transformational partnership with a charity. And one of the things that I was saying to them in their first meeting was, it's a bit like dating. Okay, so you've got to make yourself a bit vulnerable, and you've got to put yourself out there a little bit, and you've got to be open, and you've got to be honest, because I think that if you have those conversations, then hopefully the dates are, I won't go on with the analogy because it'll go too far, but you have this kind of partnership where you've actually got to the nub of, what do you want to do? Who do you want to receive the information, and how? Because it's only then when it has integrity, frankly. So I think, yes, technology can be the answer. Yes, a really fantastic digital campaign can be the answer, but it doesn't always have to be.
Sarah, what do you think in terms of reaching patients using, we've just mentioned TikTok as a kind of new platform that's come to the fore since last year's entries. Where do you see the trends going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the absolute key point, which has been said, is you've got to understand your patient group and you've got to go to where they are. So actually, we saw a couple of brilliant entries where the use of community leaders, to Jenny's point around hyperlocal, drove impact, because you've got not just go to where people are, but also understand who they trust, who they want to receive information from, the people that will have most influence on them. And that's certainly what we find in respiratory health. And sometimes these partnerships take a lot of time to build that trust and to really understand how to navigate a community, but boy, are they worth it if you can do it. So I think, you know, understanding the patient community and what is going to work for them is king. I did want to make a couple of other points. You know, people don't want to think about illness and disease unless they have to. And so one or two of the entries brilliantly used humour to catch attention. And so I think we shouldn't forget the innovation. That if you're wanting to raise awareness of an issue, you know, we all face so much noise, partly because there are so many different platforms that we can engage with in our daily lives. And I think to drive impact, companies, patient organisations will want to think, how can we do something a bit different that may catch attention, because we're all exposed to so much. So the use of humour could be a really good way into a quite difficult issue. And just one other point I wanted to make. One of the entries in particular stood out to me because it dealt with some very difficult stuff around having conversations towards end of life, dealing with very difficult diagnoses. And I think what I took from that is, you know, it's so critical to have help at that end of the pathway as well. And sometimes we all get very engaged in raising awareness, and that's really important to drive diagnosis and drive access to care. But just as important is quality of life and making sure that the treatment is appropriate and the care is appropriate at all stages of the patient pathway. And so some of those partnerships around how do you support patients perhaps further on in their pathway can be so hugely powerful and can leave such a positive mark on a patient group, a community, that I would encourage, and I hope some of the partnerships will continue to go to difficult parts of the pathway.
Sarah, I'm so glad you raised this, because it is true that so many of the partnerships we saw were focused on the whole patient, whether that would be end of life. I reflected on a couple of them that were really concerned with well-being, general well-being, so even beyond mental health, but just the well-being of a patient in a certain disease area. Colette, do you see this as a trend, again, you know, for companies to really invest about, you know, in their patient first views beyond the immediate disease area pathway where they might be invested, but looking more holistically at the patient? Do you see this as a trend that will continue, and what might that look like in the future?
I think it's absolutely critical, and I would absolutely endorse everything my fellow judges have just said on this subject. Just to circle back a little bit first on the idea of hyper-local versus some of the digital innovations that are coming through. I think we should always remember there are 12 million people in this country who are digitally disenfranchised, either because they don't have access or because they are unable to cope with access to digital technology. So, you know, it absolutely, technology is wonderful. It's going to do some amazing things and continue to do amazing things. But as John and Jenny in particular have said, we mustn't forget the importance of human contact, between people who trust each other, community leaders, and so on. The impact that all of that can have, and that needs to be factored into our thinking as companies and as industry moving forward. I think the whole patient message, Roudie, really did come through in many of the entries already. And I think that as patient-reported outcome measures and patient-reported experience measures become more and more relevant to the way in which research is conducted and care is delivered, that is going to become more, and I'm delighted to say that that whole patient approach is going to become not just something interesting or innovative or cutting edge, but it's going to become absolutely central to the way in which so much more of patient care is delivered, so much more of patient research is conducted, and so much more of the way these relationships are formed, and really look forward to seeing more innovative and creative ways of making that happen.
Thank you very much, Colette. And we have only a few minutes left, so I would like to invite each of you to share with us what creativity stood out for you. I know for me that the use of kind of a singing choir and musical instruments was fun, and of course Sarah mentioned the humor element. Last year I think we had the barbers, and Jenny also mentioned the nail salons. So please, I'll invite each of you, starting again with you, John. Was there any kind of creativity or flair that really came out in any of the entries or sort of recent partnerships that you've seen that you thought, oh gosh, that's clever, I like that?
I think there was a lot of the entries who, to Sarah's point about using humour, and I was particularly struck that some of the humour was related to awareness through community leaders and other things, but some of the nuance of what the projects were called was also very, very imaginative and sensible. So just little things like that, thinking, well, actually, you know, this is what we're going to call our project. You wouldn't necessarily then relate it to the actual content of the project. So I guess, Roudie, that is all about not only using comedy humour within a campaign, but thinking imaginatively of drawing people in by how you present your project and what you title it. I thought that imagination was very insightful.
Thank you very much, John. Me and my colleagues are delighted, as we have many very hilarious brainstorms where we think it's funny, but it's always good to know that that has an end product that sometimes is valued. Colette, anything that stood out as being extremely creative for you?
I think you've picked on two of them, Roudie, already. I think the use of humour, which so many judges have already reflected on, and you've mentioned also. I think the wonderful Deborah James, Bowel Babe, really showed all of us the importance of humour, of treating even incredibly difficult subjects with levity, in a sense, because it does engage people and it does lift people, both people who are suffering from the condition, and also really contributes to raising awareness. So great to see some humour being used in entries. And more of that, please, I would say. And I think also music was the other real standout for me in terms of creativity. That was such a wonderful thing to do. I'm sure we all know the entry we're talking about. And I think, again, it speaks to moving beyond relationship with patient organisation and into directly involving patients in a really appropriate way and a very creative way. And that was wonderful to see.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Colette. Sarah, you brought up humour. Which one made you chuckle?
Well, a few of them did. I mean, I was going to reflect. I think it was Jenny who said at one point, you know, I love a good pun. So we know for future years, the way to sort of high marks. I mean, there was some real creativity around naming and, you know, the imagination that was put into campaigns, as John said. I did want to pick up on the entry that featured music, because I want to reflect something else, which is it's often lonely and isolating to be living with a disease, a long-term condition. And so a couple of the entries really sought to bring patients together. And I think particularly in the wake of COVID, I mean, I know in the respiratory community, it has been such an incredibly difficult, I mean, of course it has for everyone, but, you know, people have been shielding, they've been, you know, they've barely left their houses for long periods of time. And so to have one or two entries really focused on how can we raise awareness, how can we provide support, but how can we bring people together, how can we show you know, some solidarity around an issue, a disease area, a community, I think for me felt really impactful. And music can be so incredibly powerful in the lung community. Singing for lung health is just absolutely critical, and very good for you. So that really stood out to me as something that ticked a lot of boxes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. And Jenny, in last 30 seconds, you know, a good pun. tell us about the importance of creativity.
Yeah, love humour, love a good pun. I think the creativity for me this year was about the models of the partnerships, actually. I think there were some really interesting models that we hadn't seen a lot of before. I think we'll see more of them. You'll hear about one of them, I think, in the next session with Novo Nordisk. I think there were some models about how you engage with healthcare professionals, as well as with, patient partnership groups at a global level, that goes beyond your typical, say, disease awareness or advocacy campaign. So I think that while it doesn't appear to be creative on the face of it, I think those structural ways in which pharma and patient groups have come together, and worked with compliance and not against compliance to create something that actually delivers behavioural impact, I think was really exciting for me to see.
Great, thank you so much. And that leaves me to thank you all again as our judges, and sharing your insights and thoughts this morning, I know is really appreciated. So I will now wave you goodbye, and I will allow our operations team to let in our next panelists. So if you just give us 30 seconds.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
We'll just wait a couple of seconds for our new panel to assemble. Fantastic. If I can invite you all to turn on your cameras and your microphone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning all.
Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, I can't. It said the host won't allow me to open my video, so that's probably a good thing, I think.
I'm sure we'll just give it a second as you're all enabled with your cameras and microphones. Good morning all. We've just enjoyed a really rich discussion. I'm sure you've all heard your projects referenced in many different ways and celebrated. And if you haven't, I'd like to congratulate all of you joining us on this panel today. We were truly inspired by what you put forward, and we're delighted that you're able to come today to share best practice with the industry. So I will quickly, as the rest of you come online, roll through our panel. It's fantastic to see so many of you today. I'll start with Karen Lightning Jones, Director of Access at Roche. Karen, if you want to give us a wave, that'd be great. Fantastic. Morning, and Karen is joined today by Stephen Scowcroft, Director of Services of the Macular Society.
Hello.
Good morning. We have Alex Moore, Senior Director of Public Affairs at Gilead. Alex,
forgive my frivolous attire. I'm actually on annual leave, so but anything for you guys. So
thank you for your commitment to patient partnerships, even on leave. And Angelina Namiba, Ambassador of Find Your Four project in partnership with Gilead. Morning, Angeline. Emma Chaffin, General Manager at Galapagos. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Claire Jacqueline, a CEO at NRAS. Good morning.
Good morning, and I too am on annual leave, so but not with Alex. I just want to make that clear.
Well, thank you for that really important clarification point. We did just have an analogy about dating, so perhaps we can deep dive into that further. We also have with us OVID Nazari, Medical Director at Novo Nordisk. Good morning.
Morning, everybody.
And she's joined with her patient partner, Will McLeod, Head of Philanthropy and Partnerships at Diabetes UK.
Hi, everybody.
Morning. Good morning. And we also have Ben Whitehouse, Head of Rare Diseases at Sanofi.
Hi, morning.
Morning, Ben. And Alan Muir, Chair of POMP and POMP Support Network.
Hi, good morning.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's fantastic to have all of you here. It's a celebration event, so we will have a whirlwind tour through some of the fantastic entries you've put in, and tell us a little bit about what really kind of pulled the thread of a great patient and company partnership. So I'm going to start by one of the founding criteria of the Patient Partnership Index, and that's that point about co-creation. A really high best practice partnership is where two parts of the partnership or multiple partners come together to really co-create. And I think that was something that was really demonstrated by Galapagos and NARS. It was demonstrated by many of you, but I'd like to invite Emma and Claire to maybe talk us through a little bit that process and how it worked.
Sure, I'm going to let Claire go first on this one, I think.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Well, when we were first looking at the We Are a Priority campaign, you know, we hadn't even got that title. So it was a real genuine discussion right from the idea of what can we do to raise the profile of rheumatoid arthritis, a very invisible disease, as most people will know. And I think it was that very open, and of course it started with Gilead before it went to Galapagos, and that was a really and it was wonderful that that partnership then continued with Galapagos. But right from that very first moment of, you know, it wasn't we weren't approached with, here's something we think is great, what do you think, and a little tick box exercise. It was actually, let's start from a blank piece of paper, let's really pull out all those things that are important to people living with any long-term condition, but particularly in this case, rheumatoid arthritis. And so that creation, that brainstorming, that, you know, throwing all sorts of ideas around and really working collaboratively together. And I felt that we were very much an equal partner in the discussions, which doesn't always happen. It is getting better, but it is really important to listen to what the patient organizations are saying, because we hear it every single day from those living with these conditions. So it was a real pleasure. It was great fun. And then we ended up with a really brilliant campaign.
And I'll just add to that. So I really liked Claire's phrase of a blank sheet of paper, because actually Galapagos is a relatively new company in the UK. We've only been operational in the UK since 2020. Galapagos has been around for about 21 years, but not with a presence in the UK. And it was really important to us as a smaller organisation to really listen to the patient partnership voices, and also approach those forums that already exist. There's many brilliant forums out there already who understand the patients far better than we do for where we're at in our evolution. We've been delighted with the partnership. We've really enjoyed it. We do feel it's true co-creation. It's been great fun as well. And I think when we were talking about this last week, we described it as having a critical friend as we approach the topics throughout. So we're delighted that we've been part of it and supporting it, and obviously equally delighted to be recognised as a gold contributor, pretty much at our first attempt, which is a great accolade for a small, relatively new company.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emma. One of the things we hear a lot at OVID Health from patient groups in particular is co-creation doesn't mean the company does everything we say. However, they do seek to hear the feedback as to why certain ideas or concepts were not taken forward. Emma, Claire, can you tell us a bit more about how the communication loop worked between your two organizations?
Well, yes, I think one of the main things is, you know, they were open to getting that feedback from us about, you know, what sort of people we wanted to be the face of this campaign. You know, why would it be, you know, one of the things I was very keen on is getting a real mix of ages, a real mix of ethnicity, of sex as well, because again, you know, often people think rheumatoid arthritis, oh, that's something you might get in older life, it affects more women, which, you know, it does affect more women. We wanted to show that this is not always the case, and I think they were really open to that. but likewise coming back the other way when they would say, well, actually, we were thinking of doing this. And I'm like, okay, that's a great idea as well. So I think it was very much that, as Emma said, you know, being that critical friend of being not judgmental of anybody's ideas, that we were able to move that forward. And I think it was a really good, strong working partnership.
I think it's about understanding what the other's objectives are and understanding the kind of synergies that each organisation or each group can bring to that, and that very open dialogue around that. And I think we understood that well. At Galapagos, we have a commitment to inflammation, which isn't just about, you know, our specific products. It's far broader than that, and bringing that to the table as well. And in terms of, I guess, broader communication, when we were looking at ways of deploying, we actually used TikTok for the first time ever. I think we were probably one of the first pharmaceutical companies to do that. And it was interesting hearing Colette talking on your previous session about ways of supporting the pharma industry. So both internal and externally, we communicated in a variety of different ways across a number of different channels. And none of that would have been possible if we weren't prepared to work together and work through the challenges together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you mentioned TikTok, because that was definitely one of the creative aspects that stood out. The other one, of course, was Pomp and Circumstance, which was the use of music to communicate. Ben and Alan, be great to hear more about that co-creation process and how you went about it.
Yeah, sure. I'll start, I think. How we started it. I was thinking about this, and it actually goes back about 30 years when I think about it, because we've worked with Sanofi and Genzyme, as it was then, many years ago during drug development. And actually, it was about 20 years ago, when we were getting close to a therapy and everybody was very excited about it, that I wrote the words Pompey circumstance on a newsletter to describe the circumstances we were experiencing. So it was really interesting when the Sanofi communications team came up with the idea that we should sing along with Pompey Circumstance, with special lyrics written by David and Cary Grant. And it was something that we worked on very closely together. You know, we had close contact with all of the Pompey community, which is diversely spread, you know, across the geography of the United Kingdom. There are only about 200, well, less than 250 people known with Pompey in the UK. So, you know, having a local group was impossible, but managing it through Zoom, organising our sort of rehearsals on Zoom was interesting, because we couldn't actually sing together. So the first time we sang together was in Abbey Road Studios. But of course, without a company like Sanofi behind us, there's no way we could have had the resources of David and Cary Grant, Abbey Road Studios, and all of that. But we did contribute a huge amount to getting people together. The design actually very closely, well, perfectly aligned with the ethos of the Pompey Support Network, in that it involved the whole Pompey community. I mean, it did bring patients together at the rehearsals and on the day of the event, but there were carers involved, friends of families involved, specialist nurses at the clinics that were attended, and other healthcare professionals, and industry partners and the staff in Sanofi particularly. So it's kind of what we've said from our inception, was that we want to bring all these people together and work together very closely. So it was an ideal project with that respect. We did get off to the odd false start, and we tried to suggest people should learn to play a musical instrument, but actually that was a little difficult, particularly with people's physical and breathing issues. It's quite sort of physically demanding to learn an instrument. So we chose to create a choir instead, and that was much more popular and despite respiratory issues, people put their whole voice into it. So it was brilliant.
Very good. Thank you, Alan. Ben, what are your reflections on the co-creation process?
Yeah, and I think Alan picked up on a couple of points there. I mean, obviously, Alan himself and Sanofi have a long heritage in rare disease, worked over many years, but you can still find projects that stand out, that are different, that are creative, that, you know, of the moment, even though you've got that long history of working together. And I also think it's important that, you know, obviously you have project objectives and awareness objectives and metrics, but we had a sort of emotional objectives, if you like, at the core of this, which was, and I think someone mentioned it previously, that, you know, living with a rare disease during COVID has been for some a very isolating experience. You know, people were shielding, hospital departments were not open to people coming in, and I think it's been quite a difficult time individually in terms of that isolation. And also, I think it's very easy to paint and to do disease awareness around rare diseases that is perhaps focuses on the disease itself and the complications. And we wanted to do, so our sort of emotional objectives were, one, we wanted it to be collaborative and together, and we actually waited until we could be together to roll this out. We did look at other ways of doing it during the pandemic, but we chose to wait it because at its core, we wanted it to be collaborative, we want to be together. And the second thing we wanted at its sort of emotional core was to be positive and to be uplifting and to give hope. And there's a lot of positivity and hope in the lyrics themselves. And I think Alan's been quite modest. He quite cleverly changed some of them to be more impactful for the rare disease community as well. So I thought that was really important in the collaboration. You know, if you have that emotional core, and you understand what you're trying to achieve through emotional objectives, I think you can build a lot around that.
Thank you, Ben. And it's really interesting what you said about objectives, because that's another theme that came through of the gold companies, was really that alignment of priorities. And I'd like to invite a couple of the companies to talk about that, starting with Karen and Stephen.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting hearing what other people say, because there's a lot of similarities there, but particularly, you know, focusing on really what we did as the Macular Society. We were looking, you know, we were looking at what are particularly around our policy and our external activities, and what our kind of core top three areas that we wanted to focus on and be impactful for as we're beating macular disease. And we've been working with Roche for, you know, on various activities, etc. But just by kind of continuing that regular communication, they were also moving into this space of macular, and also kind of looking at the kind of areas that they could have impact and objectives on as well. And really it was as a result of sitting down together, building that relationship, having time to develop that we kind of identified what they were, and they were very similar and very aligned. And I think, as others have said, you know, we have limited time and resources, but trying to kind of make the best use of that. And by building a partnership, and we developed the Eyes Have It partnership, as we called it. Hopefully that was one of the pun ones that you mentioned earlier. The judges were particularly picked up on, because it certainly had an impact on that creativity side of it. But that wasn't the main focus of it. It was really about how could together we be bigger and be more impactful than we certainly could as an individual organisation. So I think that was really what came out of it. And yes, it was kind of drawing on that shared kind of skills and experience. Again, we don't have necessarily in-house those skills and experience, but we were able to, through that partnership, reach out, and we had a really good medcoms agency that was able to be as creative as they could be and add a lot of value around that as well. So we started off small, and since then we've been kind of building and growing the partnership as well. But the Fight for Sight were another early partner within that. So it wasn't just the two of us, we were kind of working together across a number of different stakeholders of that partner. But again, similarly, identifying where our objectives were, where our core kind of key policy areas were, and working together to be greater than the sum of the individual parts, really.
Great.
I think Stephen's just articulated that so well, and I know, Emma, earlier you mentioned about sort of having aligned ambitions and synergies, and it really is around that kind of mutual desire to make patients' lives better, and really understanding that actually, if we want to see the change, we couldn't do it individually. It had to be teams working together. We had to bring different elements to it. So I think that was really, really important to us. I think the other thing was that Roche are really committed to engaging really early and meaningfully, and really bringing the patient perspective into whatever we're working on. So not only through the discussions that have been ongoing with the Macular Society for a couple of years was it clear that there was alignment, but also actually when we were doing interviews, because we were moving into a new space, all of the answers were coming up saying, actually, Macular Society are really aligned on this. You know, this is their ambition. And it was so clear that actually this was going to be a great partner for us to work with. And I think what really made it special was that it truly was an equal partnership behind almost like a shared brand. So we talked about the eyes have it. And so it wasn't sort of one thing or another. Actually, it was a very sort of co-created together element of work.
Thank you so much, Karen. Alvida and Will, again, this was something that came through in your entry and the conversation we had about it, this real ongoing dialogue to explore and really bring to light that shared priority. Can you tell us a bit more about how you do that at Novo with Diabetes UK?
Thank you, Roudie. So I'll start by putting out there that at Novo Nordisk, we believe in that purpose of defeating diabetes. And if you talk about diabetes, the societal problem that it is, it's quite a wild and ambitious purpose. So, I mean, it starts with the fact that we have to acknowledge that we really need equal partnerships with our partners. So that's the first one. And if we can clarify and crystallize that purpose, that it's not short term. So whilst this is a project which has been going on, for example, our clinical champion program for the past, started from 14, so past 8 years, but it's not necessarily just one-off. I guess that whole concept that is purpose-led, and it should be based on a trust, because if you don't really trust your partners and also acknowledge the fact that, you know, there are compliance issues around it, there are things that we need to work transparently together. And then once we really crystallize that, I guess, and you kind of build that equal partnership, then the process fall into itself. I guess, you know, that's of course you try to align based on the process, and this project becomes better and better in building that bigger partnership, I guess. They kind of help, becomes a lot more mutual. We can understand each other's concerns a lot better. We can understand how best to work through it. You know, the other example of the project we put together in the middle of a pandemic was really only possible because we had this very long-standing trust with Diabetes UK in this case. And I'm sure we'll be able to build on it. But that was really, the way I look at it is that if you define and crystallize that purpose, and then you kind of agree that we need partners in this, we can't do it alone. And then, you know, really build on that trust with your partner, and then it kind of process and the projects kind of almost come together.
I completely agree with everything Alvida said, as you might imagine. And to be honest, it's really, as someone else reflects on this earlier, you know, there's a lot of common language being used here, isn't there? A lot of, I mean, it can sound quite buzzwordy, quite jargony, can't it? But we all live it and breathe it every day and know how impactful our partnerships can be because of that. I suppose the only word that I haven't heard yet that has been implicit, but I think we've really listened to one another, and crucially listened to, in our case, NHS clinicians, professionals working in the health system, Ashridge Business School, who's another partner on this project. So this is not just about us, it's about a coalition that we've built together of kind of like-minded partners with a shared purpose, but with a willingness to also be agile within that. So we've all dealt with the pandemic in the last 2 years, which we hadn't ever imagined that would come along when we started our partnership 8 years ago. But we came through stronger, actually, and it was an opportunity to innovate and build on what we've done. And I really love that learning and that desire to innovate and continue to push new boundaries. That's been really powerful, and the relationships have been critical, at all levels. From our chief execs downwards, we have a really good working relationship, a really fun working relationship actually, that enables us to have really honest, good conversations about what we can and can't do, given the scale of the crisis we're facing. So yeah, a lot of similar kind of themes there to what you've all said, but it's great when it works. It's such a powerful thing.
Fantastic, thank you. Will and Stephen, Karen and Ovid, you mentioned the kind of a broader coalition than just a bilateral partnership, and that brings me quite nicely to Gilead and the Find Your 4 campaign with Angeline and the 4M Network. Alex, I'm delighted you're able to join us because, of course, Gilead has been a Patient Partnership Index Gold company for the 3rd year in a row, and I think we'll hear from you and Angeline in a minute about kind of that real partnership. I'm really keen for you to share with us, both of you, a bit more about how the campaign came together, because I think that's a real testament of how you've really kind of jointly set out to empower patients.
Sure. Shall I go first? Yeah, sure. Well, look, firstly, thanks everybody, and it's terrific to hear all about these campaigns and working together. And I think for me on this one, it really was interesting. You've got people living with HIV. Stigma, discrimination are really fundamental part of what's going on in the communities at the moment, and health inequalities as well. And this campaign really focused on those health inequalities across a diverse range of communities. And it's less about the objective, but more coming about how do we bring everybody together to think about what do we need to do to support everyone as a whole. Hence the Find Your 4, the sort of the mind, the body. People call it the everyday life. I call it the soul and the support. What do we all need to do that's collective to that, but also what is distinctive through all those different communities to support Black, to support Latinx? How do we support those communities? And that's what this all came together. And it is slightly cliche, as Will was saying, but that's sort of like that collaboration. It's just no one has the answers. We just have some ideas and just working together to say what are the right ideas that can bring the right solution to the table. And the other thing that's important for this one is it's beyond the treatment. It's not just about the treatment. It's more than that. It's about people living with HIV need more support than just the treatment. They need to have where are the resources, where is the right clinicians, where are the right educational matters, and it's bringing all those things together, and you can access those things across multiple channels and avenues. So yeah, a true collaboration. Really glad to have done it.
Thank you, Alex. Angeline?
Yeah, so just to reiterate what Alex has already said, what I really like about the campaign is the fact that as people living with HIV were involved right from the design stage up to the delivery stage. And also what that meant was that then the campaign, the message, then what came out is something that is very catchy, it's very clear, it's very colorful, but it also covers the areas that Alex has mentioned that are key to our lives as people living with HIV. So in a way, it also acts as an aid memoir for when we are actually dealing with our healthcare providers. But also one of the things that I liked about the campaign is the fact that us campaign ambassadors are very diverse, and we also come from the key affected communities of people either living with or affected by HIV. And so the fact that it's also very much available, on multiple platforms makes it very, very relevant and accessible to the community of people living with HIV.
Thank you for that, sharing that, and I really like what you said about the use of multiple platforms to reach people. Is something we heard about in the in the previous session as well, and a real kind of theme that's come out, from all the judges when we heard from them is this idea of kind of sustainability. And I'd really like to start with you, Emma and Claire, because of course you've already mentioned that this project started elsewhere. And Emma, I have to say, it takes a lot of courage and commitment to come in and not say, what can we do that's new or different, but actually to listen. So I'd really love to hear more about, I guess, your conversation and where you got to that desire to continue an existing successful campaign.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Roudie. So you've already said Gilead are 3 times gold partnership winners. So they clearly know what they're doing in this space, and far be it from us to come in and say we wanted to change anything with that kind of track record. But I guess on a more serious note, we saw the value in the partnership. We saw a commitment that extended over a number of years. And we saw the benefits that it was giving to patients on difficult to talk about topics, on areas that we as a pharmaceutical company would struggle to cover. And also the campaign was really delivering in terms of its objectives on both sides of the partnership. We are a smaller company, so being very transparent, we did have the discussions about do we continue this and do we not? And actually those were conversations that Claire was involved with as well. And it's again back to that open and honest dialogue. But we definitely saw the value in the value of the partnership. And also with our commitment to inflammation, it was definitely something that we were very clear we wanted to take forwards.
Well, I'm not surprised that you are now a gold company as well, because that commitment to that dialogue and openness is really commendable. Thank you, Emma. Claire, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think it was something that, when we heard that that there might be that potential that we wouldn't be able to continue, it was heartbreaking, because I'd seen so many other great campaigns in the past where it's got a short shelf life. And when we first started from that blank piece of paper, thinking about the We Are A priority, we definitely wanted to build in that it had legs, that it would continue. And of course, one of the key parts of it was looking at not just the disease, but the whole person, that holistic. And of course, there are so many areas still that we can take this campaign. We've looked at things like sexuality, the hard to talk about things. It's not just about the rheumatoid arthritis, but the impact it has on every aspect of life. And we've looked at work, the impact on work. And so there are many, many other areas yet to go. So we can see it having legs and having sustainability and scalability going into the future. And I think that's what we had hoped from day one. And so we were thrilled when we were able to continue it with Galapagos.
Fantastic. And there's a real kind of theme there with all of the projects here, but in particular with the Novo Nordisk Diabetes UK partnership. Ovid, I think you mentioned something called a top-to-top meeting. Can you tell us more about how those are run and what they are?
Yeah, definitely, Roudie. Thank you. So going back to that longer term partnership, which is meant to be really on the common shared goals and purposes, we kind of agreed that one of the things I found myself into it, I think it was running even before me, was this value of having top-to-top discussions with the executive teams across the board. Because sometimes people who are dealing with the projects, we of course, all of us are kind of biased about it. We think they're the best thing happening, and that's fantastic. That's how we should be. But in reality, sometimes if you hear from the chief executives, they may think you should do this. So in reality, when we started off by putting together this top-to-top meetings, really the intention was to talk about the priorities, what's in our mind, what is keeping us awake at night, sometimes really being vulnerable together and having that open conversations which is really helpful, because then you all of a sudden, when you agree on that level with everybody, you are on the same page, and it makes it sustainable, because in reality, we all know the value of vulnerability and transparency across partners. You know, you end up really building on a very strong, and sometimes it allows you to take those more challenging conversations with your partners of saying, I think we can push this more. I think that, and in reality, this whole idea of building leaderships in clinicians that are dealing with diabetes, this is a common passion between us and Diabetes UK, because in reality, we could see that brings sustainability, that will make it stick, that will make it grow, that will make it their own mission. I guess, you know, the clinicians are going to take the mantle of advocacy and really run with it. So I think that was one of the ways that in which we do it. And of course, we constantly try to see how best to improve that very top line, and also kind of alignment that builds the trust and then allows the project to also flourish.
Great. Will, tell us about the value to Diabetes UK of that real senior leadership dialogue.
Well, it's critical as a route of escalation. If, you know, we don't always agree, which very rarely happens, but it's a way for our chief execs to give each other a call for a heads up if something major is happening, that it's useful to get on each other's radars. But actually, having sat in many of those too, along with Avide, I mean, they're such interesting conversations. Genuinely, I come out of them having learned a huge amount, because I feel like we're both coming to the table with complementary but quite different insight and knowledge about, you know, what the challenges are and what the opportunities are too, in terms of helping the mission of our partnership. So that's great. I also think there's something around those, in those spaces, taking egos out of them, because, you know, there are some very senior people in these rooms, of course, but it's not about us. And, you know, we make a lot of assumptions, I think, you know, all of our day jobs about what it is that we're here to do, and, you know, what we know about, you know, what needs to happen. But actually, what's great about those conversations is we ground what we're talking about in the real needs, and in what we're hearing from, you know, people out there in the system, patients, clinicians. So it takes us out of the equation in a strange way. We're kind of the enablers of this program. We make this great program happen, but it's grounded in what people are telling us, and that really helps us not get too distracted or park our egos at the door, because I think that feels really important for true equal partnership, as Avide was saying. That's very much what we have. We're equal partners in this, and that's one of our great strengths. But it's not about us; it's about what we're here to do.
Thank you so much. So we've heard about the deep and long-term relationship that was such a core part of the entries and the kind of gold companies. Just before we wrap up in the last 8 minutes, I really want to touch on the more creative and fun aspects. Angeline and Alex, you know, you talked about, Angelina, you talked about how using the multiple platforms and having a real kind of strong creative concept actually enabled more diverse reach and input. Can you tell us more about kind of, I guess, you know, how you went around the campaign and why it was so important to really kind of pull in from all these different parts?
Yeah, just to reiterate that how we went about it, I think the key thing was very much about the fact that we were involved from the beginning, and our ideas were taken on board and actually incorporated into the campaign. And so that meant that we were able to involve communities who are directly affected. And also it just went beyond the treatment. It's also very much about our quality of life. So the campaign benefits was done for us, by us, with us, to benefit us, to enable us to have a good quality of life beyond treatment. So that enabled us to have a buy-in in it, but it's also for healthcare providers, which means that it benefits us and our healthcare providers in terms of enabling us to lead a good quality of life. I don't know if that makes sense. So in a way, I feel that it's going to be very sustainable, because it's something that we identify directly with, and it reaches many, many of us living with HIV.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the key thing for us is that, particularly on those diverse communities that we're trying to engage, having those ambassadors, having that partnership meant we knew the right thing to say to the right person, community, in the right way at the right time through all the various channels. And social media can be a wonderful thing sometimes, and so that's the way we can do that and filter it through to the right communities. And that's the really important thing, that you can only have that right language or the right tone or the right emotional connection when you've created it from the start. So yeah, it was really great.
Fantastic. Karen and Stephen, tell us as well about kind of your multi-channel approach to the Eyes Have It campaign and why that worked.
Yeah, I think what we were trying to do was make a big kind of impact, particularly with raising awareness in the political sphere, really. So that's why the kind of Eyes Have It and the voting in Parliament was kind of really kind of engaged. But that wasn't the only focus. It was around having a number of different activities as well. So we started off with Eye Health Awareness Day in Westminster, and led up to that with various articles, etc., kind of building up a groundswell. And as a result of that, we've been able to kind of build on that going further, and having debates in Westminster Hall, and bringing together a group of cross-party like-minded individuals as well, which has been really great. And I guess what's been really important is being flexible, fleet of foot, and that was a bit of a challenge within a kind of multi-stakeholder partner, because everybody also wants to get their particular priority across, but actually it works really well by building on all those things that people have said, talking about things, challenging, putting things on, being a bit vulnerable and compromising as well, as you would kind of building a relationship, etc. And what our challenge going forward will be to kind of keep that. The more and more people want to get involved, and we want more people to be involved because we want to talk across as a sector, but that becomes more of a challenge. How do you maintain that going forward? So that's kind of the area where we're looking at still doing those multi-channel activities while bringing a number of different partners on board as well.
Stephen's articulated it so well. I think the only things I could potentially add to that is, Claire, you talked earlier about really trying to enable to get space in a crowded place, and really what this enabled us to do was to capture people's attention, and actually that was externally as well as internally. So internally we ran a similar thing with individuals from Roche, which actually really helped people understand what we were doing and trying to do, which also created kind of a groundswell. I'd like to think it also made people realize that working with pharma doesn't have to be super serious. And although of course we have to comply with the ABPI, and that's really important, actually I hope it makes people realize that actually we are very relatable and accessible. And I think what's come across from everybody today is how purpose driven everyone is, and that this is really about doing better for patients and those with lived experience than it is about anything else, and that's come through so strongly today. So
thank you so much. And it just leaves me to kind of finish with Ben and Alan. I'd love to ask you both to just end it by singing the Pomp and Circumstance song for us. But failing that, I will also give you the choice to, I guess, tell us more about how, how did sort of taking such a creative idea land with both of your communities, internally at Sanofi, but also the wider group. Or you may sing, I'll leave it up to you.
Muted, Ben.
Ben, you're on mute. I thought we'd got through a whole conference without.
I know. I thought I'd done it as well. Alan, why don't you can go first, and you're welcome to sing if you want, Alan.
No, I won't. Thank you. No, the creative element was so important in this. I mean, on several levels. The obvious one is that it did gain media attention, which was brilliant. We've had a Hollywood film about Pompe disease in the past starring Harrison Ford, but who's ever heard of that and remembers it? So you do have to keep repeating the message and plugging away. But apart from that, the Pompe community of families living often in isolation with their rare disease, they love to see this sort of thing, see projects involving their very special community. So that was just wonderful. And the resources produced the film of Bring Us Hope and Glory, which is on our YouTube channel and other places too, and videos of the three singers. They've been used by media, but they'll be sitting there forever, hopefully forever. It's being able to continue to use those somehow that's going to be a challenge, I think, as others have said, maintaining that momentum somehow. we've tried to do that, but also it's inspired us to think about future projects involving music and other interests that people have, because it does capture the imagination.
That's great. I'll just let Ben come in if he wants to before we wrap up.
Yeah, and Alan put it very well. I'd probably leave with one reflection actually, which was that, you know, often when we work in industry, we move around within roles, and you know, we spend short times of period working within certain disease areas with certain communities, and for me, being in that room in Abbey Road Studios, the first time you hear that, when you record a song, you record it in chunks. The first time we heard it played back to us, just a rough cut at the end of the day, I think most people in the room were in tears. It was such an emotional experience, and so many of my team were there in the room, and I can't tell you how much it meant to us. It really invigorated what we come to work to do and why we're in what we do, and then collaborate. I know Alan felt the same on the day. You know, I think it just invigorated us so much in what is our purpose.
What a great way to end, this invigoration and this energy. Thank you, all of you. It leaves me to congratulate you one more time. Thank you for sharing your best practice and being part of the Patient Partnership Index. I hope you all have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you for those of you who listened as participants as well. And I wish you a good day. Bye.